How do you feel about the Big Bash League? Excited? Bored? Worried? Angry? Maybe? Probably not. Chances are, if you're anything like me, it's somewhere in between. It's so-so. You don't love it. You don't hate it. You'll watch it if it's on, but you won't feel like you've missed anything if it's not. The BBL is just okay. But is that okay? Or does the league need to be fixed?
200s in a row for Steve Smith. The man is an absolute superstar.
There are two kinds of 2020 leagues. The traditional model, which uses the same teams as other forms of the game, as seen in New Zealand, and the franchise model, which creates new teams out of thin air. Most franchise leagues have private ownership, like the Indian Premier League, which was just copying the Indian Cricket League. The IPL has been so successful that some of their franchises have expanded into other leagues that use the same model. But a couple of franchise leagues don't have private ownership. Instead, their teams are 100% owned by the cricket board that runs the league. And the Big Bash League was the first to use this model. In an Australian context, it makes a lot of sense. Australians aren't huge fans of private team ownership, especially in the big sports. Of the 4 football leagues in Australia, only one has majority private ownership, and it's from one of the 2 smaller codes, soccer's A-League. The largest football code, Aussie Rules, has no private ownership whatsoever, and the next largest, Rugby League, has only really had a smattering since the 1990s. Private ownership is therefore also a foreign concept to Australian cricket, which perhaps explains why Cricket Australia chose to keep their new domestic T20 league in-house when it started back in 2011. There were other benefits to doing this as well. Owning all of the franchises ensured that Cricket Australia could control the narrative around the competition, sorting out team media obligations and so on. And it also meant that they had more power to ensure that teams were on a fairly even footing. Owning every team meant they wouldn't advantage some teams over others. Not that any of this had really been a problem before the BBL. This may come as a surprise to younger viewers, but in the early days of 2020 cricket there was the Big Bash, a traditional league with the 6 Australian state cricket boards playing each other in a short round-robin competition. The teams were all fairly evenly matched, although Victoria dominated the finals. Across 6 seasons, only Queensland failed to make it into at least one final, but they also never finished last. Compared to the IPL though, the Big Bash seemed like small fry. No final ever reached a crowd over 30,000, and average attendances were generally in the mid-10,000s by its last season. There was also no free-to-air coverage, because Fox Sports had the rights to all domestic cricket. And while there were the occasional international superstars like Chris Gayle for Western Australia and Shahid Afridi for South Australia, there just weren't enough to get the attention of the general public. But worst of all for Cricket Australia, the lack of matches and the overall design of the competition meant there was money being left on the table. Lots of money. Crucially, New South Wales and Victoria had as many teams between them as Tasmania and South Australia, despite the big population gap between those states. So there was real money-making potential in splitting these big state teams up and creating local rivalries in Sydney and Melbourne. Cricket Australia also felt that, to get the attention of the public, they needed to glitz up the league in the style of the IPL, rather than keeping the apparently dreary connotations of the Australian state teams. And thus was born the Big Bash League, with flashy names, flashier uniforms, and a concerted effort by Cricket Australia to get big-name players into the league. The first season of the BBL was, well, not actually that much different to the Big Bash. In fact, in the second season of the BBL, attendances were basically on par with the league's predecessor, with an average attendance of less than 15,000. Cricket Australia had poured all this time, all this effort, and above all this money into this BBL, but the shine seemed to wear off straight away. That was, at least, until the really big change came in the third season of the league, when the rights for the BBL moved from Foxtel to Network 10. Every match of the BBL was now on free-to-air TV, and audiences came in droves. Viewership hit the all-important 1 million mark on the very first night of the 2013-14 competition, and the final reached 1.5 million Australians. Average match attendances also climbed every season from then on, reaching a peak of 30,000 in the 2016-17 season, more than double the average of the second BBL. So for all the hype that Cricket Australia tried to generate around the competition when it started, all that glitz and glamour and advertising weight that the Big Bash had never been given, it turned out that the only thing that really mattered was free access to the league for the average Australian. Free-to-air television gave audiences a chance to get acquainted with this new competition. They could watch familiar names playing cricket locally, while unfamiliar names got a chance to shine alongside them on primetime TV. And once audiences were acquainted with the BBL, they wanted a piece of the action for themselves and went along to the matches in person. Channel 10 really deserves some credit for this. As a network, they were desperate for something to hang their hat on when they bought the rights to the league in 2013, and they gave it their all. There was no guarantee when they bought the rights that it would pay off for them. Would people really turn to Channel 10 to watch the cricket, especially for some pokey 2020 league? The answer was yes, they did tune in. And they stuck around because 10's coverage was enjoyable. The commentary team had a good mix of star power and steady journeymen, mixing names like Adam Gilchrist, Damien Fleming, Mark Waugh, Ricky Ponting, and Kevin Peterson, with local hosts like Mark Howard and Andy Marr. The commentators were also clearly directed to make people feel welcome, not taking themselves too seriously, but taking the cricket seriously when it was called for, something Channel 9 had been failing to do for years. You could even say that 10's coverage was symbolic of the league as a whole. The talent on the field, like in the commentary box, was a mix of star power and domestic talents, both journeymen and new arrivals. While the feel of the league wasn't super serious like the IPL, but was still fun and could create special moments, something that the format of 2020 is meant to do. T20 cricket is all about quickly generating exciting moments. So by around 2017, Cricket Australia could see themselves swimming in money. The television rights for all their cricket would soon be up for sale, and they wanted $1 billion for the lot, BBL included. Naturally, any TV program that could regularly get 1 million viewers would be worth paying for. So just to sweeten the deal, Cricket Australia upped the number of matches per season, so that every team would be playing the other teams twice, once home and once away. It seems like a no-brainer, right? More matches of a popular competition would surely be good for everyone. Broadcasters get more viewers, players get to play more and get paid more, fans get to go to more matches and watch more on TV, and Cricket Australia gets a bigger return on their investment, which they can pump back into cricket. Everyone's a winner. But like so many business ventures before them, CA and their stakeholders failed to account for how people actually felt about the BBL. You know that feel I mentioned? That the BBL wasn't serious but produced some good and fun cricket? A big part of that feel came from the length of the competition. Each team only had 8 matches and 4 at home. This made the BBL less of a proper league and more of a carnival. Proper leagues have full home and away schedules, for the most part. Carnivals just throw a schedule together so people can have fun over a short period. The BBL was normally completed within a month, but by lengthening the tournament, Cricket Australia was trying to make the BBL into more of a proper league, and perhaps this would have worked if it wasn't for 2 other things. The first problem was that the star power of the league was dwindling. Here are some of the international names from the first few seasons: Kieron Pollard, Brendan McCullum, Dan Vettori, Shahid Afridi, Herschel Gibbs, Dwayne Bravo, Chris Gale, Mutai Muralitharan, and Tilakarani Dilshan. Add to that guys that would make a name for themselves like Luke Wright and Yasser Arafat. And on top of those, you had big name Australian players. Ricky Ponting, Matthew Hayden, Brad Hogg, Sean Tate, Michael Hussey,
Shane Warne.
That's a lot of star power to draw people's eyes to the product. And the fact that local players like Travis Burt, Craig Simmons, Ben Lachlan and the like were able to perform against these big names just added to the carnival feel. By contrast, recent years have seen teams often avoid big-name internationals in favour of value-for-money picks, usually players from England like James Vince or Jamie Overton or David Payne. Solid choices, but not likely to draw a crowd. This isn't all the fault of the BBL teams, of course. The competition stood basically alone on the T20 calendar when it began, whereas now it's competing with leagues in Bangladesh, the UAE and South Africa, which all have money to throw at international players. Furthermore, the big Australian names have mostly been absent from the league, a consequence of the BBL schedule overlapping with the international schedule, along with a lack of international retirees sticking around to play some more domestic cricket. As a result, there's a larger proportion of the so-called no-name domestic players appearing week to week, but without that David and Goliath feel that they used to bring playing against the superstars of the game. And a consequence of this has been that the league feels more unserious than it used to. Online, you may even find people throw around the term meme league to describe the BBL, which is almost a terminal disease for any competition wanting to be taken seriously and attract a crowd for being the best quality show in town. The other problem is more of a cricket problem than anything else, which is that the BBL franchises are exactly that. They are franchises. These aren't historic clubs representing a region like the English counties, and they were deliberately designed as replacements for the historic Australian state rep teams. These franchises are teams with no history, and in the case of half of them, little reason to support one over the other. Do you support Melbourne Green or Melbourne Red? Do you support Sydney Pink?
Magenta, not pink.
Sorry, Magenta. Or Sydney Lime Green? Does it matter? It's probably no coincidence that the two teams with the strongest local support have been Perth and Adelaide, whose teams are largely state squads wearing different colours. In the case of Perth, the strength of their state squad has also made them the best team in the BBL over and over and over again, which is pretty good for their local support. In any case, the problem with the franchise system is that cricket is fundamentally a representative sport. The top level of cricket has always been international representative teams, and pretty much every domestic competition has also largely been based on regional representation. The success of the franchises in the IPL is partly built on the cities hosting each franchise making themselves quasi-regional representatives anyway. It's also partly built on the quality of the international players involved because of the money on offer, and mostly it's built on the sheer size of India's population, which creates the money and the local support for these teams. Australia does not have these things, which means that the Big Bash League attempting to emulate the IPL as a serious league is just going to look strange. This is why the whole glitz and glamour thing only really made a small splash compared to the attraction of being a carnival, available to everyone on free-to-air television. The BBL is at its best when it's being itself, a short, fun competition of decent quality cricket that everyone can get involved with and which doesn't take a great effort to keep up to date with. The shift to a twice as long season, combined with the return of a partial paywall, meant that the league was suddenly demanding more of the audience's attention, and money, to keep up with. When you add in the drop-off in star power, what was once a fun little summer tournament suddenly felt like more of a drag. Commentary in traditional and social media started raising concerns which only got louder as crowds went down, viewing numbers went down, and Seven and Fox started accusing Cricket Australia of selling them a faulty product, and even going to court over it. Cricket Australia introduced all kinds of gimmicks to try and increase interest, like allowing a substitute player, X-Factor player, and a bonus point, Bash Boost point, for teams who had a higher score after 10 overs. But these were really just changes for the sake of it, and no one's going to start watching a match on the off chance that their local side might get another Bash Boost point. They also replaced the previous international player free-for-all with a draft and allowed teams to have 3 internationals. But because most of these internationals don't have star power and many of them leave partway through the season, it hasn't really changed things either. In truth, if there are really problems with the BBL, they won't be about the gimmicks, but about the foundations. The structure of the BBL has not really been changed since it started back in 2011. As part of the new television agreement with Seven and Fox, Cricket Australia agreed to shorten the league back to 10 matches per team, perhaps hoping that that would bring back the carnival atmosphere. But if that was their intention, why have the league take just as long to complete as it did before, but with 4 less matches per team? And why start the league so early in December? I don't think most people even knew that the 2023-24 season had started until it was 2 weeks in. They had a whole starting week before the first test, where only one of the 7 matches had an attendance over 14,000. Why not just start it on the 19th? And have more double headers to get it done by the end of January, or start it earlier and finish it earlier, so that teams can keep all their players for the whole season. It just feels like such a middle-of-the-road solution. Keeping things as they are, but with less matches, is not suddenly going to make more people invested in the long term, because nothing else about the league has really changed. Even with the lack of star power, the quality's pretty much the same, the teams are certainly the same, even the mix of commentators is basically the same. More matches or less, more time or less, it's all more or less the same. But is this really a problem? Does the BBL actually need to improve? Sure, it's not as popular as it was 10 years ago, but it's hardly a dying league. For all the talk about how it was too long and people were switching off, which wasn't incorrect, it wasn't as though no one was watching or showing up to matches. Most sports can only dream of getting 40,000 people to attend a match from time to time. Yes, the true superstars have largely disappeared, but you still get to see about as much quality cricket as there's always been, and some pretty exciting and sometimes funny moments as well. Yes, there's journeymen running around, but there's always been journeymen in the league. That's part of its appeal. That's part of the appeal of 2020 cricket. This is probably another video in the making, but even the IPL, for all its superstars, has some bizarre matches and has players that don't really seem to fit a league that's all about the world's superstars coming to play cricket in India. Cricket in its purest state has no time or fielding restrictions, and the sport has developed in the direction it has from that truth. It generally rewards the fittest, most skillful, hardest working, and so on, and test matches bear that out. 2020 cricket has a weird way of messing with that reality, so you sometimes end up with harebrained thinking, bizarre tactics, and unusual players coming along, none of which would ever see the light of day at the highest level in the longer form of the game. This seems especially true of the Big Bash League. But you know what? I think that's okay. I think a league with a mix of superstars, decent domestic players, and grade cricket legends is okay. I think a league which doesn't take itself too seriously, but takes cricket seriously, is okay. And I think having teams and players willing to do weird, unusual, or accidentally meme-worthy things is okay. It makes the league inherently fun and carnivalesque, which is exactly what the BBL was like when it gained popularity. It might not be what Cricket Australia dreamed of, but the Big Bash League was never glitzy or glamorous. no matter what coat of paint was being used on it. Just look at the name. Big Bash League doesn't exactly evoke high-class, serious competition, does it? It's the fun league, the meme league, the little tournament in the middle of summer that's nice and relaxed and helps pass the time over the holidays, which gets thousands and thousands of spectators at every match. Is it perfect? No. Could it be better? Sure. But when you watch Josh Brown bludgeon 140 runs off 57 balls, or Lance Morris drag Perth to victory with another fifer, or Cam Boyce rush through his 4 overs for less than 20 runs again, you realise that 3 hours went by fairly quickly, and it was pretty fun to watch, even with the dropped catches and slow pitches. The BBL is okay, and maybe that's okay.
Ground of 53,000.